Hi, welcome to Life is a Treasure podcast. I'm your hostess, Michelle Durand, and you're listening to episode number 27. On this episode, I'm joined with a guest. Her name is Danny J. Johnson, also known as Danny J. Danny is driven, passionate, fun, and full of laughter. She is a high-energy speaker who can dish it to you straight, but with just enough sugar to make you want more. Danny J is a serial entrepreneur who has created multiple successful brands and online businesses with one underlying principle: make people more awesome. She won Allie Brown's 2012 Entrepreneur of the Year Award, lived through being paralyzed at age 22, and was a suicidal and pregnant teen with quite a turnaround story. She owned a very successful personal training and online training business, No Excuses Fitness, and has helped thousands of people shed unwanted body fat and find inner confidence. She coached fitness competitors to the stage and has even graced the stage as a national level athlete and fitness magazine cover model herself. She has been interviewed as a trainer and an entrepreneur on numerous podcasts and was featured on HuffPost Live. More notably online, she co-founded the Sweaty Betties, one of the largest online fitness communities for women, to teach the truth about nutrition and exercise. Danny is committed to helping women find their true issues. She is not afraid to talk about what others don't want to talk about. Her major goal in life is to allow every woman to see the power she already holds and shine a bright light on those who have a story to share. Danny J discovered the most effective method of capturing attention and increasing revenue, sharing personal and brand stories. Her work can be heard on her weekly podcast, The Best Life Podcast, and she can be followed in real time on all of the social media platforms. She now teaches innovative brands and influencers to close more sales, become better leaders, and blow up their brands with the irresistible power of sharing. She also helps tens of thousands of families become debt-free by sharing her real-life getting out of debt story and challenge through the Find the Money Project. She also has a program called The Happiness Diet. I love this quote from Danny. She says, "You can't control what happens to you. You can only control how you act. Bad stuff happens and life is not easy, but we can be resilient and realize that this is the best life. I can look at everything negative in my life, and we all have a million reasons to say why things suck. But if you really look around and just be grateful, you realize that this is just the best life." Danny J. Johnson. So get comfortable, sit back, and I hope you enjoy this episode. It's definitely a Tears to Treasures story, and I know that it's going to change your life. Hi, Danny. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. So Danny J. Johnson is my guest today, and this is my first time meeting her virtually, and it's such an honor and a privilege. I have been listening to Danny's podcast, The Best Life Podcast, for years, and I reached out to Danny back in 2018. I listened to your podcast, sharing about your adoption story, and as Mother's Day is approaching, I just really felt in my heart that it would be such a great time to bring you on as a guest and share your story. I also have an organization called Tears to Treasures. It's all about taking those times in our life that are painful and tearful and full of fears, and then they're transforming them into a beautiful treasure, which your story is a definite example of that. So I would just like to ask you, Danny, if you'd like to just kind of set the background of like when you grew up and what led you to this point of making that decision of adoption versus abortion.
Yeah, I love that. I love the Tears to Treasure idea. You know, if you had asked me back then if I could have ever seen where I am now, it was nearly impossible. Like sometimes you're in a situation that feels so dark and so heavy that you don't even believe that things could get better. And that's really, honestly, that's where I was at 15. So I had been living at home, obviously. I was in seventh, eighth grade, and my mom has a sister that has consistently been in and out of abusive marriages. And so she would come to live with us off and on. Usually she would come to live with us and I would have to give up my bedroom and go stay in my brother's bedroom. And she had a son, so my cousin, and sometimes he would be with her, sometimes not. But my aunt had been married 8 times, and through these multiple marriages and multiple times she'd been abused, she came to stay. And there was the last time she got beat so badly that she was hospitalized and there was nowhere for her son to go. So they sent him to live with my family. And this cousin had sexually abused me when I was younger. And so I was now in 8th grade and he was in high school, a couple years older than me. And so at the time I was really scared of being left home alone with him. My parents worked, they wouldn't get home until 4 or 5 o'clock. And so there was a few hours where we'd be left home alone. So I started to tell my parents I didn't want him there. I wanted a lock on my room and they didn't know why. And nothing happened while he was there because I stopped coming home from school. I would just stay afterwards, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe at home. He would make comments to me. He did like really just nasty things. He would say perverted things. And so I knew if there was a time that we'd be alone, he would do something. So I really was like getting into this place where I was afraid of being home. I didn't feel safe there. I had expressed my concerns and nobody seemed to care. And my mom a couple times just said I was selfish. I didn't want him there. And she didn't know the reasons. And then I finally broke down and told them, and it ended up making it worse. It was like, well, it happened a long time ago, or did it, they didn't believe me. Then of course they brought it up to him and he denied it. And so it turned into this like, where not only did I not feel safe, now I didn't feel like anybody believed me, and it just made it worse. And so I was also a gymnast at the time. And of course, going through puberty in 8th grade and the body image stuff, my coaches were weighing us and starting to like really put pressure on our bodies. And so I had all of this going on. It was just like the perfect storm of just crap on a young girl,
Yeah.
And so I just became really depressed. I started having an eating disorder. And I was super suicidal. And I just kind of felt like nobody cares about me. Nobody's here to protect me. And so I really just wanted to kill myself. And I met a boy in school and he became my boyfriend. And I know he had gone to this mental health facility like a year before I met him. And so I had been telling him how I was like wanting to kill myself. And he basically told me I needed to tell my parents to take me like to get checked in. So there was one night I just was really losing it. And I told my mom to take me. So she really did not want to. I was screaming and she finally did. And I think she took me just to prove that I was like, quote, not crazy. She's like, this is for crazy people. So they took me into an intake room and basically said like, your daughter needs to stay here. And so my mom was super pissed about it. And they left. I ended up staying there for almost a month, and they put you on these levels of suicide watch. And so I was on 24-hour watch for about 3 or 4 days. And then I was on like limited, I have somebody with me nearly all the time. So first it was like, you couldn't go to the bathroom by yourself. Somebody was like literally just following you around. They took everything away, even my journals. I had like a spiral bound notebook. They didn't want you to be able to hurt yourself with anything. And so while I was in there, when they do the intake, they do all these blood tests to test you for drugs and alcohol and apparently pregnancy. And I had just started becoming sexually active. In fact, at this point, I probably had sex like 4 times with my boyfriend. And the second day I was there, the psychiatrist called me in and he sat me down and he just said, hey, your pregnancy test came back and it's positive. And instantly I said, well, I'm having an abortion. Like I didn't even have a second to think about it. And honestly, I didn't even think that I was pregnant. I was supposed to start my period like any day. So, and we had been using protection except the one time, obviously, pulling out and everything. I'm like, well, of course this happens to me. And so I just said I was going to have an abortion. And he of course, the doctor was like, well, why do you want to do that? And I'm like, I'm going to kill myself anyway. So why does it matter? That was really my mindset. It was, if I'm going to kill myself, it doesn't matter if I kill the baby too. Like it only makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
And so that's really where my mindset was. And I was, it didn't mean anything to me. Nothing meant anything to me. Life was pretty meaningless to me. I hated everyone, hated everything, especially myself. And after a couple of days, so now I'm in the intake and I'm starting to have meetings with counselors and psychiatrists. One of the counselors there, she convinced me to tell my parents, because in the state of Nevada, which was where I was, you don't need parental consent to have an abortion. So my plan was to leave once I got checked out of there and to do it on my own, and nobody would ever know the difference. And then I would kill myself, and then life would go on for everyone else but me. And so she convinced me, or she made it seem like I should tell them, even if I was going to have the abortion. And so we made a plan for my parents to come. We'd have a meeting, and she was going to be there and facilitate this meeting. But the counselor was late. My mom got there early. And so my mom was waiting there. We were waiting for my dad to get there, waiting for the counselor. And my mom just starts like, what is this about? What are we here for? And then she goes, are you pregnant? And I was just like, well, that's what I was going to tell you about. And she lost it. She started screaming at me, she was trying to hit me. They ended up having to take her in another room because she was like going to pull my hair out. And I was like, see, I knew it. This is exactly why. Nobody should know. I didn't want to say anything. Yes. And it just like validated why I should have an abortion and why this wasn't going to work. Mm-hmm. And so, after she calmed down, my dad got there, the counselor got there, and I was pissed at the counselor. Like, look what you made me do. Went back to the meeting with my parents, and my mom was just glaring at me the whole time. Like she hated me. And my dad was like, okay, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I'm having an abortion. And my dad was like, no, you can't do that. Like, we don't believe in that. And I was like, sorry, but it's not your decision, And so I had a chip on my shoulder, and I was angry. I was angry at everyone. And, I was pretty determined that was the way it was going to go. And so I met some people in this facility who had a car, had money. And so I made the plan. There was the yellow pages. I made an appointment, and I had the plan to do this as soon as I'm going to say escaped, but as soon as I was discharged. And so I had the plan to go, and it was on a Wednesday. And the day before I was supposed to go have the abortion, my parents had set up a meeting with this eating disorder clinic. They were talking about sending me away. It was a place in Utah, and it was like a year-long program. And I guess they had been referred. So they took me to this meeting. They were supposed to meet with the doctors and counselors. And then they sent me into a room with this lady that worked there. And so I'm just sitting there, arms crossed, like, this is, so stupid. Why am I here? Yeah. And this woman, we just started talking, and she was so kind. And her name was Heather, and she was, I want to say 27 years old, maybe. And she had 2 children. And she told me how she had been raped by her brother's friend, and that now she ended up being anorexic, and now she couldn't have kids anymore because of her eating disorder, and she wanted kids so bad. And just out of nowhere, I just blurted out, I want you to have my baby. Wow. And I remember in the back of my mind, like, it was like there was 2 people. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're getting an abortion. And she's like, what? Are you serious? And I was like, yes, I want you to have my baby. And it was like my mouth was speaking, but my head was like, what the hell are you doing? We already have a plan. And I just felt so compelled and so touched by her. And she just seemed like such a sweet woman, and it seemed unfair. And so I left, and we exchanged numbers, and I left. I remember calling my boyfriend, and I said, so I met this lady, and I want to give her our baby. He's like, okay. And so it was like, I'm just as confused as you, but I just decided to do this. And I remember, funny enough, is prior to that, my dad said, why don't you just place the baby for adoption, when I was saying I was going to have an abortion. They said, there's no way. I'm not going to, I have an eating disorder. I'm not going to get fat and have this pregnancy and then just give my child away and not know where she or he is, and not know where she's going, and not know anything about, like, there's no way I can do that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. I was like, I would rather just have the abortion than to go through all that. So the fact that I said this, it was another big thing, because to have an eating disorder, to have this massive fear of gaining weight and to go through pregnancy is like what am I doing? I'm going to make this worse. So I made the decision, and about 2 months later, the woman called me bawling, and she's like, Danny, we can't do the adoption because private adoptions are $50,000 and we don't have the money. And so now I'm way too far along in the pregnancy to have an abortion. And I'm like, I do not know what to do. And now I know I'm having a little girl. And so I'm really faced with a new decision of, do I still do an adoption or do I keep her? And, ultimately I always say, when you have an unplanned pregnancy, you have three hard decisions. You have abortion, which is not an easy decision. You have adoption, which is not an easy decision, or you have to keep the child, which is also not an easy decision, especially when you're 15 years old. And I remember just thinking, like, she did not ask to be born. And it's unfair to have her grow up in a house that's so volatile, and there was so much fighting and so much crap going on. I'm like, this is not a place to raise a baby, And then my own thoughts of like, how will I be able to work, and how can I provide, and where will I go? And if I have her, maybe I'll be stuck here forever. And I wanted to get out so bad. Yeah. But on the flip side, I'm like, I don't want to give her up. I don't want to just have her, give her to strangers and never know what happened to her. And so how do I decide? And so I found an agency, and I reached out and just to get some information. And my biggest fear was, I think we all hear about the old days of where the mother has the baby, they whisk the baby away, don't see it, don't know where it went. And then like you hear these horror stories of like, they went to a terrible home, and I was like, I just can't. Right. And so I was relieved to find out that adoption's changed a lot. And even since I placed, adoption has changed a lot. And so they told me they have something now called semi-open adoption, where I can choose her family. And I would be able to get pictures and letters every month until she turned 1, and then once a year until she turned 3. And then after that, no contact. And that gave me so much peace, because I thought, well, at least I can know where she's at, and I could just know if I made the right decision. Ironically, you still have so many questions, right? But I ended up after school, like every single day, going to read profiles, families, I went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families of like, who is it going to be? And then, the pressure to choose the quote unquote right people. And how do you know from a single letter? And so I didn't even pick them out until literally her due date. Thank goodness she was late, because I was like, I was going through and nobody felt like the right people. And finally picked out her family, and I was able to meet them. I had her 5 days after her due date. And then we had her for 7 days before they got her, because it was an out-of-state adoption. And I was told, by a lot of people, don't hold her, you're going to get attached, don't look at her, all of those stories. And for me, that was not an option. I knew what was going to happen, but I couldn't just not see her. I couldn't not hold her. I couldn't not, know and be able to just feel like this is the right thing to do. Okay. And so, we were in the hospital for 3 days, and then she went to foster care overnight, and then we met at the office. And so I saw her for another day. And I got to spend time with her and change her clothes and change her diapers and kind of like spend that time. And when I met her parents, I remember thinking, oh my God, what if I meet them? I hate them. And I changed my mind. Yeah. And I was like, and I remember just being so nervous. And once I met them, I felt so much peace. And I thought that the day I left, I'd be bawling, but I went away. I met them. We talked for about 2 hours, and I left just feeling so calm and so peaceful. And I was, I wasn't upset that day. There's definitely weeks after, lots of crying and lots of mourning, but I felt like they were the right people, they were the right people for her. And, all that to say that during this time was a lot of tears, a lot of pain. The one thing that I just now, like within the last year, have really been able to experience was grieving that. Somebody loses a child, they get to grieve. But I think when it comes to maybe abortion even, or adoption, is that it was almost expected that once she was like gone with her family, that I was just supposed to get on with my life and pretend it never happened. And it did happen. Yes. And, my body is still, I'm still producing milk. I'm
Yes.
like, my body's still healing. It
Mm-hmm.
obviously happened. And yet I'm supposed to pretend on the outside that it didn't.
Yes.
And so I struggled with that. And then I struggled with, in my early 20s when my friends were getting married and having babies,
Mm-hmm.
on purpose, and the celebration, right? Like you have a baby shower and everybody's excited. But when I got pregnant, it was not something to celebrate. And so I struggled with that for a long time. But ultimately, that was my journey and my path. And there's so many things you go through the years of still wondering, did I do the right thing? Because after she was 3 and we lost contact, it's like I was like, the thing that I would hold on to was like waiting for that year mark, and I get the pictures and see how she was. And there's always that wondering of how is she doing, and is she going to hate me? And tons and tons of questions.
Wow, Danny, that is like a lot for a teenager to go through. And I'm sure you must have felt alone at that point of going through that stuff just because of the relationships, the way that they were. And then you must have had feelings for her, and then to like place her in someone else's hands and arms and know you don't know when you're going to see her again and if you'll see her again. And so was it torture to live through those years, or how did you manage it in your mind? How did you deal with the feelings that would keep coming up?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were a struggle. So my mom and I really didn't have a great relationship, but then, after she was born, my mom wanted to see the pictures and see the letters and be part of it. And I kind of felt really protective, like, no, you don't get to be a part of, right? Like you don't deserve that.
Right.
And so I was really protective of her and who got to see. And it was hard because I think, as any parent probably knows, is like they're really proud of their children, and like on one hand I wanted to like show her off to everyone and like, look at my baby, look how cute she is and look what she's doing. And on the other hand, it was a secret that nobody knew. I went to a different high school afterwards. I met people who met me after I had her and never even knew I had a kid. One of my best friends, we were best friends for years, and I didn't tell her. There was never a time to be like, oh yeah, by the way, I never told you this.
Yeah.
And then the longer the years went by, the weirder it got. And so then I'm like, oh my gosh, one of my best friends doesn't even know. And so, there were those things of having friends who were pregnant, and they would talk about their pregnancy symptoms, and they're like, when you get pregnant, this is how it's going to be. And I would just sit there like, yeah, I've been there, but I couldn't admit it, So that was really crazy. And you did feel so alone, because I want to say back then, and I don't know what the percentages are now, but it was like less than 2% of unplanned pregnancies are placed for adoption. So I didn't know anyone else who had placed their baby. There wasn't like a support group. There wasn't any resources. And it was interesting because a few years ago, around the time right before she turned 18, I started looking. I was like, you know what? Now we have Facebook. Maybe there's support groups. So I joined a couple support groups, and I was very disheartened because I found there were a lot of adoptees that were very upset. They were angry that they were placed. I found a lot of adoptive parents who were bitter. They felt like they were taken advantage of. They felt like the social workers were just trying to take the baby, and it was like this business. And I never felt that. I felt like it was fully my decision. I didn't feel coerced, but there was a lot of coercion in adoption. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what if she hates me? What if she is wondering why I did this and thinks that I abandoned her, when the reality was I did it because I felt like she would be much better off in another place, And so, every single year on her birthday was really tough. Every single month on the 25th was really tough. It's not like just once a year. It's like every day I would think about her, and then every month on the 25th, and then every year on June 25th. And it's something that never goes away. You never stop thinking about it. You never stop wondering. And then ultimately the year she turned 18. So with the adoption, I signed papers that said if she wanted, like my records would be released. If she wanted to know, she could find out. And so the whole year before, the year she was 17, I felt like just this panic and like it's getting close. And yet I know probably nothing will change. You know, it's not like she's just going to turn 18 and then just show up on my doorstep. But the possibility was there now. And so it was like, wow, I waited 18 years for this. And now what's going to happen? Mm. And so there's a lot of pressure on that. And is she going to hate me? And am I good enough for her? Or is she going to think I'm a loser? Or, you know, who knows? Like you think of all these things. Yeah. And, there was, I started going through these groups, that made it worse for me. Mm-hmm. And I ended up just ultimately kind of following my own heart on that. And, I reached out to her biological dad, or not her biological, her adoptive dad. Because of the internet, I had actually found out like who they were. And, I got her information. I got an email and I found out her address for college and ended up sending her like a big gift box for when she got to college. And I didn't hear anything. And so then I'm like, oh, great. You know, like you send a present and then you're like, yeah, oh, okay, now what? So that was pretty rough. And, then I emailed her. Or maybe she finally emailed us back. I think she said like 6 months later, she's like, I'm sorry, I was really overwhelmed. And, you know, I had to give her grace. I'm like, okay, she's a teenager and who knows what she wants. Yeah. And finally I found out that she was going to be in California at the same time I was going to be in California for a speaking gig. And she had said in her email something about, she had talked to her roommates and she was asking them their opinion. Like, what should I do? Should I meet her? Should I not? Should I talk to her? And they were just like, do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. And she said, I just wish somebody would tell me what to do. Mm. And I remember I read that line over and over and I was like, maybe I just need to tell her to meet me. Yeah. So I was going to California and I just sent the email and I said, hey, we should meet. And I was kind of expecting no response because she hadn't responded for, you know, months and she wasn't very responsive. And she immediately replied back and she just said, sure. And I was like, wow. Oh my God. I don't know if I was ready for that. I was kind of just hoping maybe, I don't know. So we ended up planning to meet. We met at an IHOP on 1 p.m. on a weekday. And, you know, I wanted somewhere quiet. It's so funny because I think when I had her, I only had 2 visions of her, right, as a baby. And then this imagined reunion in the future of like what she might look like as an adult and what this reunion would look like. And so in my head, it's always like the TV of like, you're in the airport with a sign and balloons and you like see each other and hug and cry. Yeah. And so of course it was not like this. It was a freaking IHOP. And I already knew what she looked like because I had stalked her on social media. So I had an idea already. So it wasn't a surprise. And, you know, I was waiting and I was nervous and I was waiting for her to come in. And I was like looking down at my phone because she was late. And then I just heard her voice behind me. And she just says, hey there. And I turned around and I remember the first thing that like really stood out to me was her voice. Because I had seen like pictures, you know, I'd seen pictures and I knew what she looked like, but I never heard what she sounded like. And hearing her voice was like one of the, I don't know, just one of like the highlights of that. And, you know, I was so scared. I'm like, do I give her a hug? What if I freak her out? And so I gave her a hug and I was like, okay, don't do this too long. And then she just kept holding me. And that was really, really amazing. And we ended up talking for 2 hours and it was really fantastic because she was so grateful. She wasn't, you know, I wanted to be open to being okay with her being mad at me or angry. You know, I realized like she's going to have her feelings about this and all I can do is answer her as best as I can. But she was, you know, very grateful. And she said she grew up exactly where she thought she should have. And we just had some laughs at like our similarities and things that we liked. And it was really, really cool. And then since then, it's been a couple of years now. It was just been slow. You know, I've really tried to ease into the relationship and not force anything. And, you know, I'm not trying to come back and be like, okay, I'm your mom now. So it's been slow, but it's been really, really, it's been really amazing. And I think I'm really lucky that it turned out to be so, so positive because I know it doesn't always turn out that way.
Wow. What a story. And, I'm just so blown away by it. And I'm just so honored that you were able to share this with us because, yes, it doesn't always turn out that way. And I was going to ask you, and then you just mentioned the word mama. Did you always feel like you were a mother from the time you were pregnant, when you gave birth, when you gave her up? Did you always consider yourself a mother?
That is a good question. And the answer is no. It's interesting because I was on a podcast called, it was like something mom. And she's like, how do you consider yourself a whatever mom? And I was like, I never, I think I feel, I was a mother in the fact that I looked out for the best for her, but I didn't, stay up with her at night. I didn't drive her to practices. I didn't do any of those things that I feel like would take away from what her mother did for her. And I never want to take that away from the person who spent the hours and invested the time to raise her. And so I'm fine with being called a birth mom. I don't think it's less than that. It's not like a sperm donor or something where you just jerk off and walk away. I obviously had to do a lot more work and it was a lot more emotionally invested. And I'd been emotionally invested from the beginning. But to consider myself a mother in the way that her mom raised her, I wouldn't want to take that away from what her mom did, Yeah. And so, I know it's interesting because I'm in another adoption group now. I don't know how I got in this I need to leave all the adoption groups on Facebook. They're just bad, but there's interesting things about how there's some disdain for the birth mothers. Like, you just tossed your baby away. You just threw away your child. You just abandoned, which is not how I felt at all. But then there's these comments of like, well, it's not that brave. The brave thing to do would have been to keep. And I'm like, honestly, it's brave and it's tough no matter what.
Yes.
In my opinion, the more brave thing was to place her. It was, I think, when you look at it, it's like, who benefits the most? We're looking at like all of the pieces and all of the people around. And to me, just to keep her because I wanted to was the more selfish thing to do. I think some people, and like they would say that like, you're going to see her and you're going to want to keep her. And it's like, yes, you can see someone and want to have them, but ultimately know that that's not the best for them. What's best for me is not what's best for her. And so I was really trying to put her first. And I think if that's what being a mother is, then, I'll take that definition. But when it comes to like being there for her whole life, I can't take that part. I definitely can't take credit for that.
Beautiful answer. What does she call you?
She calls me Danny. I actually asked her, I was like, what do you call me or refer to me as? I think her biological dad's name is Danny also.
Oh.
So I think she refers to her parents and stuff. They just call me Danny. But I think she does just like, she'll refer to me as her birth mom.
Okay.
But it's funny because she works for us now. She actually edits our podcast.
Oh.
So she sometimes just jokingly says, I'm her boss. I am her boss that created her. She's like, this is my boss that made me.
That's cute.
But she's got a really great attitude about it. Her mom's her mom. And what was really cool was I actually finally got to meet her mom last Mother's Day for the first time. So I had, met her dad years ago. They got divorced, and there was always like these stories that maybe her mom didn't want to have anything to do with me. And there was some like misunderstandings. And to be honest, it really hurt me because I felt like I had so much respect and admiration for her mother. And I felt that she didn't, when she didn't want to have anything to do with me, that hurt. And we finally got to meet last May. Wow. And got to talk through some of that. And now we've been in more communication, and there's been a lot of healing, and we've had a lot of better conversations since. But that was really tough. That was actually one of the tougher meetings, was meeting her mom.
I can't even imagine that. But I just love how your story has turned out. And I can tell that you have done so much healing. And you want to share a little bit about that? Like, how was that healing process for you to get to this point, to be able to speak
Yeah.
publicly and to share this story? I mean, you have to come from a place of healing to be able to share as you openly do with the world, and knowing that, Courtney hears them and can listen, to
Yeah.
them. How was your healing?
Yeah. The healing process is definitely something that requires work, and I was
Hmm.
very, very lucky in that the agency that I went through, I had an amazing social worker, and she was my counselor, not only through the process, but after. And so I had those resources where I had, her name's Stephanie, and she's one of my, like, really one of my heroes. And I think why I'm here today. She helped me through so much, and she helped me, she made me at 15 read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And she was like, you get to decide how you come out of this. This isn't things being done to you. This is consequences of actions, but you get to decide how this looks. And I fought that, and I wanted to blame everybody. I wanted to blame my cousin. I wanted to blame my parents. I wanted to blame, society. And I had to learn to take responsibility early. And, I still had that victim mentality off and on, but she was like really holding me to a higher standard. And then, she moved on. I had another counselor all through high school, and just books, and lots and lots of personal development work.
Okay.
And all of that just kind of has added up. And then finally being able to talk about it. And to be honest, I really had to wait. I didn't really tell anybody until she was like 12 years old. I want to say was the first time I openly was on a podcast and mentioned that I had a daughter placed for adoption, but I didn't want to give any details, I really didn't have any anyway. But that was the first time being public about it. And then once I met her, I have just kind of asked her permission. Is it okay if I share this? Is it okay if I talk about it? And she's been really great about that. I don't want to share anything that's too personal about her. I don't want to exploit it. It's funny because I posted a picture when I met her, and I got this nasty, nasty DM. And I was elated, so it didn't bother me. But my assistant at the time, she was like trying to block the girl because she was basically saying like, close your legs, masturbate. Like, why did you give up your child? And now you're exploiting her. You did nothing for this girl. And I was like, people can say whatever they want, but I know myself, and then I know Courtney, and we know each other.
Yes.
And how we feel. And she feels grateful for it. And I understand that there's adoptees that don't, and they're valid as well. Yeah. Everybody has a different experience. And so I think meeting her was super healing. A big piece was meeting her mom, and then also just allowing myself to grieve for the 16-year-old that went through that, and that was only last year, that I really got to have that experience and just really like let myself grieve when I didn't get to do it back then.
Right. Yes. Because you really did have to just move on and kind of live like it never happened, because in everyone else's world, it didn't happen. It only happened to you. And and so, wow. And I'm wondering how, so Courtney was okay. And I wasn't sure about, you sharing her name, but I definitely will link the episode 18. That's the one, that I listened to, the adoption story, and I'll link it so anyone else who wants to listen can. But after that, what made my heart so full, Danny, was to hear the conversation you had with Courtney on episode 19. Like that, just life full circle is what the title is. And it was so beautiful to hear her side of it and to openly have that conversation between both of you. And, I thought, wow, first of all, I always admire you. And you've been so inspiring to me. I mean, listening to you and Jill on the Best Life podcast is what encouraged me and inspired me to start my podcast. And then to hear your story that I didn't know prior, I was like, wow, so much in common. And just, I look at you as such a strong, brave person, because I didn't choose that route. And I felt like I wasn't that brave, but there is no comparison. We each go through our journey the way that we're meant to go through it. And to then hear Courtney, I thought she is as wonderful and beautiful as her mother. And that's how I see both of you. Every time I think of it, I just think she is as beautiful as you are, and she's so wise like you. And you can tell she has really put in the work to be able to understand her feelings, to have a relationship with you. I just give both of you just so much respect and just so much. I'm just so grateful that y'all are sharing your story, because it's always been such hush hush, and it's something you just don't talk about. Yeah. And what that does is it leaves our mind to go spiral downwards, like thinking all the bad things. And the whole reason I really wanted you to come on and share is because there are beautiful testimonies of adoption. And I want people to hear that, that it doesn't always end up terrible and horrible stories. It does not always end that way. And it's rare that people do share the good parts, like they just want to share the bad things and focus on the bad. But yet I love how you always, and you've done so many things. You speak out about so many other topics, and your biggest tip and the thing that your underlying core value is mindset. And, I hear it through every single time I listen to you. It's about mindset work. And as I listen to you, I hear that this takes a lot of mindset, right? Because you can stay in victim mentality. We can stay in guilt and shame and pain, or we have a choice. I love how you said that you had counselors to share that with you, that you have a choice. You don't have to stay there. And you are an amazing example to your daughter. And I love that about you. And I was just so blessed to hear that episode with you and Courtney. And I can't even tell you again how much that means to my heart. It just blessed me.
Thank you.
And I know that it's going to bless so many people who are listening to this podcast. And, I know you've been through a lot of other things. You talk about your depression and your anxiety and your suicidal thoughts. And I just love that you're open about it, because when people are left in the dark, it's the worst place to be. And so you shine that light and help people rewrite their stories. And I'm just so thankful for you. And I just want to take that moment to share that with you. It means the world to me.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so funny. I want to go back and listen to the episode with Courtney, because I remember when we did that, we hadn't really known each other that well yet. I asked her, I was like, hey, would you like to do this? And I remember even asking her questions that I didn't know the answers to yet. We hadn't really had that many deep conversations. And since then, we've been able to, hang out more. And she lives in LA now. And so I've seen her not a ton, but at least more than back then when I interviewed her. And it was really special to me to have her on there and to be open and really cool. Like you said, she is really wise, and she has a really great perspective. And I mean, I just really admire her. Just I think for her age, I think she really has a good, just a really great perspective. And ultimately, like you said about mindset, it really is about how we choose to look at things. And of course, I'm like anybody else, there's times where I want to blame anything and anyone except myself. But I know that ultimately I have to choose, how I want to be. And that was one of the biggest things that came out of having her. Was I had the decision, right, that I wanted to kill myself. And after I had her, the big decision I made was, I thought, what if I kill myself and she grows up, asks what happens to her birth mom, and finds out she committed suicide, and she thinks it was her fault. Like, I was born and so my mom killed herself. And so I made the decision that I would live. And it was interesting because I remember at the time, I didn't have any goals of like what I want to be when I grow up or anything, because I didn't think I'd make it that far. So it was like, okay, now what do I do? Like, I have to live now for what? And I had to find reasons, and I had to find things to do. And I know a big thing for me was like, I felt when she turned 18 or whenever she became an adult and wanted to meet me, I hoped that when she met me, that she would be proud of me. And the really funny thing is I remember sitting there at IHOP with her, and I had that moment in my mind. I was like, this is what I wanted. I want her to be proud of me. And I didn't care. I was like, she's 18. She's like a teenager. I don't care what she thinks of me. But I was like, I had this moment of like, I'm freaking proud of me. Like, I'm proud of myself. And That was one of the biggest lessons I got out of it all. Was I did it so much, I thought, for her, but ultimately I ended up really feeling proud of myself. And if she's proud of me, cool, but I'm not going to base my perception of myself on that.
Oh, beautiful. And Danny, isn't that what you do now? I mean, share a little bit about what you do and how you help people, because you've ultimately found out how to help yourself. And so how do you now, like, what is your purpose and why did you stay living? So what do you do now that helps women?
Yeah. What's so crazy is I feel like anytime I figure out something for myself, then I want to help people get through that same thing, right?
Yeah.
So for a long time I ended up being paralyzed right after college, and I started to walk again, became a personal trainer, and I started going down that route. Okay. But I realized that I really didn't care so much about I was working with a lot of weight loss clients, and I realized that a lot of people struggling with weight loss and body image stuff, it was never really about the food, and I should have known that myself, because going through my eating disorder, it's never about the food. It's about the control, it's about what's going on, the trauma. And so I realized I really wanted to help people get to the root, and what do they really want? And ultimately, we're all looking for, we're looking for love, we're looking for acceptance, we're looking for peace, we're looking for confidence. Mm-hmm. And so I've created different programs throughout the years. But right now, like two main ones, I have a program called the Happiness Diet, which is really just breaking down all the pieces of your life, your physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, your relationships, and like looking at all those and learning how to prioritize them and learning how to communicate better with people in your life and communicate better for yourself, so you know how to get what you want. And sometimes a big thing is like we don't know what we want. Mm-hmm. And so figuring out what that is and how to communicate that. And then I also have a big program that I've been doing for about 4.5 years now. It's called Find the Money Project. And Find the Money Project is ultimately just helping people live a life that they choose. And sometimes money is that piece that we think we can't have what we want because we don't have the resources. We can't live the lifestyle that we want because we don't make enough money. And that simply isn't true either. And so I help people, one, recognize their own resourcefulness, find leaks in their budget, see where they're not being faithful, and then really define what they want and figure out how to get that through money. And I think, interestingly enough, money and food are really pieces that are a reflection of our internal beliefs. Okay. And as we work on those things, sometimes we shift the inner. It's interesting. Sometimes we have to, with mindset work, it can go both ways. Sometimes I think you really need to work on the mindset before it manifests on the outside. And sometimes I think you can work on the outside stuff and it does the reverse, working on the inside. And so with the Happiness Diet and with Find the Money Project, it does kind of a little bit of both. It's mindset, it's practical tools. It's really looking at your beliefs and questioning them and then choosing new perceptions. So both of those are either at findthemoneyproject.com or thehappinessdiet.com. And then I work individually with people on their online businesses. And I also speak to a lot of women entrepreneurs on how to rewrite your story. Like if you have, my story looking back, I could have told myself that I was a pregnant teenager, nobody wanted me, I was used up. What man is ever going to love me? There's all these stories we can tell ourselves, or we can shift and look at a different way of I got a second chance. I am here as a survivor. So looking at what those stories are we told ourselves, and how can we reframe that so it's a more empowering story moving forward.
Yeah, so true. Because you can choose to be in victim mode. Everything's happening to me, or flip it. Everything's happened for me for a reason. And I think a lot of it comes down to not feeling that we don't feel worthy. We don't feel worthy to have money. We don't feel worthy to be in a relationship, and so I love that you do that, because it always gets down to that core issue. And then there it manifests, or like you said, flip it around. Once they start proving to themselves, I can be creative, right? And I can do this. And then their self-esteem becomes stronger and they're more confident. So your work is amazing. We just wrapping up the Find Your Money Project, that challenge you just did. And Danny, it is I love it. I love your energy. I love how you bring everything just down to earth of how to find more money. And especially during this time, this economic crisis that we're in, so timely. And then the Happiness Diet, it would be, sounds just transforming for anybody, right? Who's doing any issues that they're trying to deal with. And so I just thank you so much for sharing the things that you've been through and then putting them into a program that can then help other women and men. Men do your programs as well, right? Or is it mostly
Yeah, a
women?
few. I mean, I mostly talk to women. Every
Mm-hmm.
once in a while we got a guy in there, and it's
Yeah.
not specifically
Okay.
for, I just happen to talk to mostly women.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
if there's someone who's listening right now and maybe they're in an unplanned pregnancy and they're in this situation where I don't know if I want to have an adoption or if I want to have an abortion, like, what would you say? Can you speak to that person who's listening and maybe are just so undecided? What would you say to
Yeah.
them from your experience?
This, yeah, this is such a good one. I remember one of my cousins got pregnant, and my mom was like, "You need to convince her to give up her baby." And I was like, "I will never convince somebody to give up their baby. I will never convince somebody to do anything that they don't want to do." So ultimately, I think number one is understand how scary that can be. There's so many unknowns, the fears of not only how do you take care of, might happen to my body, what might happen to, maybe the partner you're with isn't going to be around.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing to one is just like take care of you and figure out, make sure you're safe. The second piece is like ultimately looking at the child. I think you need to put the baby first, and what's the best scenario for this child. And there are some arguments. I've seen this in these adoption groups, arguments that the child should always be with the birth family, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but there's a lot of people who will go down that route. But if that is what you feel, and if you feel this baby needs to stay with you, then I would do anything you can and everything you can to make sure that you can do that. If you choose adoption, or if you're not sure, just get the information. I basically just went to get the information. I wasn't certain when I went to talk to those people. Actually, I was kind of like, I'm not doing this, but let me find out what the options are. Because now they have even more open, mine was called semi-open. Now they have even more open adoption where you can see your child and you can be involved. And so there's a lot of options. But just know that no matter what you decide, it's got to be your decision. Don't let other people coerce you. Don't let other people tell you, that it's going to be better. Because I've heard of women who've had abortions who have been like, fine, I'm so glad I did. It would have been a disaster if I had a baby. And also women who've had abortions who regret every single moment and can't stop thinking about it. And they live in guilt and pain. And so you have to be able to live with your decision. And any of the decisions can be difficult.
Yes.
Living with regret is difficult. Living like the way I lived, not knowing, is difficult. Raising a baby at 18, 19, like a toddler, that would have been really difficult.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, I would say seeking counsel from people around you, but the bottom line is coming back to yourself and making the decision that's all you, and not allowing anybody else to make a decision for you, because that's when the most regret is. I've definitely heard people placing their children for adoption who regretted it every single day and wanted that baby back and wish they never did it. And so I was always concerned, hoping I did the right thing, but I wasn't regretting it because it was my decision. So ultimately, just my advice is to, trust your gut, sit with it. You have some time to make any decision, and know that you can make it work. You can make it work. There's a pregnancy isn't a end of the world. You'll be able to find a man again. If you're a single mom and you'll be able to find somebody. Like, I think sometimes we catastrophize and think like, oh, if I have a kid, then nobody's going to date me ever. Or, like there's so many things so many stories we tell ourselves, and none of that's true. Right. So maybe find someone who did raise a child as a single mom, and ask them their experience. Find someone like me who gave up their daughter and ask their experience. Find someone who's had an abortion and get all the information, and then sit with it yourself.
Great answer. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Danny, because I know that so many women find themselves in that situation. And I totally agree. It has to be from your own heart, or else you'll always be angry and bitter and resent whoever encouraged or coerced you to do something. And great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just thank you so much, Danny, for sharing your time with us right now and sharing your experience, sharing your heart with us, sharing part of your life. And I'm just so honored to have you here. It's been wonderful to sit here and to feel like I'm having coffee with you. Finally. And I'd love to have you back again and, see what you're doing in a year or so and what's been going on. And I just look forward to having you back.
Yes, absolutely. Anytime. And thank you for letting me share this. And I hope that if it just helps one person, that's what really matters.
Yes. Thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Life is a Treasure podcast. I'm Michelle Durand, and I'd like to personally invite you to join us and continue the conversation in our free Facebook group, Life is a Treasure podcast. The link will be in the show notes at lifeisatreasure.com. You can also find my social media links on the website as well. Please reach out to me and introduce yourself. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what your biggest takeaways have been. And as we begin to share our secrets, our stories, and our struggles, we find that others can have the courage to start sharing theirs. And this is how the healing process begins. So please help us spread the hope and the healing to others by subscribing, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. And make sure to tag me on Instagram at Michelle Marie with 2 E's, Durand, Durand, with hashtag Life is a Treasure podcast for a chance to get a shout out on the show. And also visit lifeisatreasure.com for all the resources and freebies mentioned. We believe that everyone is equal and worthy of healing and unconditional love. And we promise that if you invest your time and energy to do the inner work, you too can transform yourself and create a life that is a treasure. So you can live authentically, love unconditionally, and laugh wholeheartedly. And until next week, peace, love, and joy.